Welcome to the History of Christianity podcast with Stephen Bedard.
In this episode, we have the first of what I hope to be many interviews with historians and other scholars in related fields. In this episode, I chat with Dr. Mark Steinacher. Mark is an assistant professor of history at Tyndale University College, a school that I also teach at, and he is also the pastor of Drumbo Baptist Church, a church that I've had the privilege of being able to preach at. I think you'll enjoy this conversation. To begin with, Mark, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became interested in history?
It's fascinating how I ended up being a historian, because if you were to ask any of my high school friends who was least likely to become an historian, it would be me. I did dreadfully in grade 13 history. I dropped out of grade 13 physics twice, and yet I ended up writing a doctoral thesis in history that used a post-Newtonian philosophy of history. Well, basically, in university, I started with a scattergun approach to my education. You could still do a general BA then, so the courses all over the map. And I had an economic history course with J.H.A. Monroe, and he was splendid, and he really piqued my interest. And so in second year, I took a few more and did really enjoy those, and it went really well. And so in third year, I managed to pack a lot in, and then I took my 3-year degree so I could go in and do my MDiv, but I took a fair bit of history in that as well, and got advanced standing because of my undergraduate work, so I started doing some upper level courses. And then an odd twist, I'll give you just the short version of it. I ended up having to finish my MDiv at Christmas one year and started my THM that winter term, and started it in history. And things just kind of unfolded, and I got some really good advice, and ended up doing an understudied topic in Canadian church history to do with Methodism, how they broke apart into various factions and then got themselves back together in the 19th century, and went on to do my doctorate looking at what's now the Congregational Christian Churches in Canada, then known as the Christian Connection. And there were some weird things in their background, and I ended up looking into chaos complexity theory using a book named War, Chaos, and History by Roger Beaumont. Very, very formative for my thinking. That's how I managed to find myself being an historian.
Wonderful. That's quite the story. Now, you mentioned a couple of the things that you have focused on in the past. What's your current area of focus when it comes to church history, and what drew you to that?
Okay, the two things that really interest me most at the moment are eschatology and ecclesiology. So the one is the doctrine of the end times, and the other is the doctrine and practice of the church. I've taught upper level courses in both of those, and both of those are spin-offs from my thesis. In terms of the people I was studying, I accidentally discovered one of the main sources of early Adventism. And so in the process of sorting out what was going on there, I've developed that interest. And of course, my work was, we were coming up to Y2K and all of the crazy announcements people had about, there's one person otherwise sensible, and this isn't a preacher, this was a secular speaker who said, without computers, we may lose the ability to generate electricity forever. And it's like, well, we were generating electricity before we had computers, so what? A lot of hype. So trying to sort through that. Ecclesiology has been important to me because of the unusual nature of the group I was studying, and I continue to look into that because I think it's one of the sleeper issues in terms of people getting off track in the church. There's a lot of problems with governance. There's a lot of misunderstanding of how the church is supposed to work. And we really need to look at that a lot more, I think. Trying to convince some people that that's an important topic is a little more difficult. But, I look back at the Middle Ages, and it's two issues to do with ecclesiology, the papacy and monasticism, that are foundational for defining and understanding the Middle Ages. And what we're doing now, seeker-friendly, various other things that are happening. And we need to look at that carefully. There's good ways to do seeker-friendly, and there's absolutely dreadful ways to do seeker-friendly. By itself, it's neutral. It's what you do with it. And we need to have a good, solid biblical basis for what we're doing. And by that, I'm not saying that there's a single prescription. I remember once somebody asking me, a person in a leadership position, and he said, "Mr. Historian, what's the most biblically sound form of church government?" And I looked at him and smiled and said, "Episcopal, Presbyterial, and Congregational." And he wasn't too amused with me. But all three of those can be justified using the scripture. And again, it's how we use them. And what is it? Is it enhancing our ability to commune with God and with each other, or is it interfering?
Interesting. Yes. We could have a whole nother conversation about how the United Church of Canada was able to blend those three.
Yes, and how at different times each one of those has asserted itself more strongly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very interesting. Now, if you could meet any one person from church history, who would you love to sit down and chat with?
I bet I have an answer that no one else you're interviewing will give. I would love to sit down with a person from a millennium ago named Alfred of Enghien. Alfred was an abbot. He was the founding abbot of the new monastery at Enghien, which is maybe 8-10 kilometers northwest of Oxford in England. And he was just an amazing figure. He wrote large collections of sermons in Anglo-Saxon, which was really unusual for the time. Most preaching on the continent at that point was still in Latin, which, of course, does the average person no good. But Alfred was part of a larger trend in England where people preached in the vernacular, and a lot of the monasteries were responsible for the pastoral care of the area around them. So monks would go out and preach these sermons that Alfred had written for them. And his sermons are interesting because he thought he was being very conservative. The idea of original thought, which we just adore in our current situation, I mean, it's necessary to get a doctorate. Original thought was frowned upon in the Middle Ages. And so he thought of himself as conserving, but he did have some original thought along the way. It's rather amusing that he didn't see that some of his sermon illustrations, for example, were novel. Why he's important is not just for himself, and I have my students look at him and compare his work with the work of an archbishop named Wulfstan from roughly the same era. But when the Reformation happened, one of the charges against the reformers was that they were doing novel stuff. They were innovators. They were destroying the faith once delivered. And Alfred was one of the figures that they could go back to and say, no. Look at this guy. He's preaching what we're preaching. And the added strength being that he was English. I mean, Martin Luther looked at Bernard of Clairvaux, amongst other people, but here you had an English monk who was able to articulate the truth in just an amazing way. I translated quite a few chunks of his sermons from Anglo-Saxon into modern English, and I think I got to know him reasonably well. And I look forward to sitting down with him in the great banquet in heaven if that's what we get to do.
That's fantastic. I have heard of him, but I knew almost no details about him, so that's great to hear. And you probably are right that you will be the only one to pick that particular person from church history. But that's good. That's what we're looking for. Now, in addition to teaching history, you're also a pastor of a local church. In what way is history relevant to the average person in the pew?
A lot of people think it isn't, and a lot of people have been taught history in terms of memorizing long lists of dates and stuff. And I mean, that's just recipe for boredom and destruction. I've had quite a number of students over the years say, that's the kind of model I was expecting. And then the way you taught church history, it's like, this actually has some meaning for today. It's like, yes, it does. What I'm trying to help them develop are critical thinking skills. I mean, this is talking more about students, but when it comes to a person in the pew, my background in church history is it's kind of like some types of painting where they add layer upon layer of paint, and it adds a richness that isn't there with just a single layer of paint. I'd say that's part of it. I mean, I can draw upon a huge number of illustrations, stories that they probably haven't heard before, but which make a lot of sense, which really connect with where they are today. Because even though Elfrich and Wolfstand didn't have hot and cold running water, let alone the internet, they're still human beings. They're people who struggled with real life problems. Those two individuals had very different solutions to the problems. You look at Martin Luther, and again, people sometimes kind of make him into this wonderful, wonderful man that was absolutely perfect. No, he wasn't. I mean, I hope to prove someday I'm descended from him. There's a distinct possibility I am. But he is still a flesh and blood human with his weaknesses. He got worried about things. He got depressed. All sorts of. I think we do a disservice when we paint our Christian ancestors as these wonderful, marvelous, they did nothing wrong kind of people, because it sets up a standard we can't live up to, and it distorts the reality. And so whether it's Oliver Cromwell or Martin Luther or whomever, to look at them and say, you know what, they messed up, and God still used them. So that means, for the average person in the pew, yeah, I've messed up. I've done this, I've done that, whatever the list of problems are. But God can still use me. If I put myself into his hands, it doesn't matter that I, in the past, did this, because I've confessed it, I've renounced it, I've found his mercy, and he's going to pick me up and continue to use me. So, yeah, it's a richness of illustrations, but also that very powerful connection that when we're dealing with historical figures and historical movements, we're dealing with people like us. We can identify with them. It also helps us see that people can work really hard and not succeed, at least by the world standards. So when you look at somebody like Wesley, John and Charles Wesley, they just huge names. People recognize their names. Our hymn books are full of their hymns. Some of their music is still used in congregations that only use praise and worship music. And yet there were other people who went before them who used the same techniques, often identically the same techniques, who had the same emphases, who are not the household names, who aren't the people that get the churches named after them. And so the idea that we keep working quietly and silently, Jesus bids us shine with a pure, clear light. You in your small corner and I in mine. God will use us. And that's another insight from Chaos Complexity. I don't use the highfalutin terms with them, but the idea that if 3 people out of the congregation of 25 act differently because of a sermon, it might just be a small thing, that's going to join together with other small things and will change the world. The congregation might not look any different, but we, in our obedience, and the church down the road with 150, where 12 people are obedient to what they've learned, just small things, just tiny course corrections, we're going to change the world. It doesn't have to be these great monumental revolutions. God, the Holy Spirit, will use us to change the world.
That's great. That's, as a fellow pastor, that's very encouraging to hear. And I try to take those same kind of lessons and to share them with my people as well. Now, if you could recommend one history-related book, what would it be?
It's called The Invention of Tradition, and I should have checked beforehand. It's edited by Eric Hobsbawm and I believe Hugh Trevor Roper. It's an amazing book. Hobsbawm and Trevor Roper are both Marxian historians, and I can see in my mind's eye some of your listeners getting out the garlic and the silver steak. Marxians, we're all going to die. No, I don't agree with all of their conclusions, but Eric Hobsbawm in particular, I've read other of his work, he helped me learn how to ask really probing questions, to get past the status quo, to get past the pat answers and say, come on, what's going on here? And so the whole idea with the invention of tradition is that it's quite possible to take something recent and make it look like it's old. Kind of like taking a piece of modern furniture and, bashing it with some chains and, rubbing it with some sandpaper and stuff to distress it and make it look like it's an antique when it really was made in, 3 years ago kind of thing. This is really important in the current situation. I've noticed a real shift in the past few years. I've been teaching at Tyndale. I've taught since 1998, with a bit of time in between at McMaster. Did EA work for Alan Hayes at Wycliffe before that. So I've been working on this for about a quarter century of teaching. And I've seen some big shifts. Most recently, one of the problems historically I had was that students were far too eager to believe what they read in a newspaper or a magazine, and trying to get them to think critically about the fact that maybe the reporter didn't have a specialist background and he or she misunderstood what the specialist was saying. Today, I have the exact opposite problem. For whatever small percentage, say 10, 15% of people were just enamored with newspapers, I now have 10, 15% who believe that all mainstream news sources are fake. And so if you mention something that was on the BBC, fake news. Maybe with CNN or Fox News you could say that, but BBC, come on, nobody's perfect, but that's a pretty reliable source. I'm trying to get people to understand the need to sort through the evidence, to do that work for themselves, and not just, it's really easy just to say, oh, I believe whatever favorite source I have. But there's an awful lot of trickery out there. Even just today, I was looking at something and I discovered a term that has been around for maybe a quarter of a century, but I only ran into it today. It's about the internet. It's called astroturfing. Astroturfing it's a pun or a wordplay on the idea of a grassroots movement. And there are people out there who, for a fee, will create what looks like a grassroots movement, but it's not really. So it's astroturf. And so there's mounting evidence in the last couple of American elections of groups paying people to create these false populist movements. There's even stuff called persona management software. So if you're running 15 characters, you don't confuse and post something as Steve Bedard when you really wanted to post it as Stephen J. Bedard. Not that your persona are different, but it's just kind of an example there. But yeah, it's frightening to me how gullible Christians are, how they will repeat information that fits their perceptions of reality without testing it. So, one of the classic examples is that chain letter that goes around, Madalyn Murray O'Hair is trying to ban all Christians from the United States, or from the airwaves. It's like, really? Come on, check it out. Wasn't happening, but it fits our idea that we're being persecuted. And even with what a lot of people claim as persecution in North America today is, to my mind, the losing of cultural hegemony, the losing of cultural initiative. So we're used to being in the driver's seat, and all of a sudden other people are saying, no, we're not doing that just because you say do it. This is not a Christian nation per se. We're going to do things differently. Oh, so the different things, persecution. No. People need to expose themselves to reality where in some parts of the world people really are persecuted for being Christian, not just because they have to bake a cake for somebody whose views on marriage they disagree with. That gets me. So this book, The Invention of Tradition, would really be helpful in terms of people figuring out, oh, that's been made to look old, but it isn't. I believe Hobsbawm's chapter is on the British monarchy and how they, for the last 150 years, have really managed their image in a way that projects certain things. And some of the changes that are happening in the monarchy now threaten to undo that and may actually undo the monarchy overall. That's not my point. My point is that we need to be developing these thinking skills to see through when something has been invented. Christians have always thought this. Well, Christians have always voted this way. The average evangelical in the United States a century ago would have voted Democrat. Now people go, what? No, that's wrong. Well, William Jennings Bryan ran twice unsuccessfully, came Al Gore close to winning the presidency, but he didn't. But his massive support was from evangelicals who voted for him on the Democrat ticket.
That's interesting stuff. Yeah, very good. Well, I'll make sure to put a link to that book in the notes for this episode. But Mark, I really appreciate you taking this time to share and to give us some insight in what it's like to be a historian. And I just really, really appreciate this time together.
Yeah, fantastic. Good to be talking with you, and hopefully we'll see you face-to-face on some point.
I'm looking forward to that.
Good stuff.
Okay,
Steve.
take care.
God bless.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the History of Christianity. If you would like to support this podcast, I encourage you to go to patreon.com/hopesreason. Even $1 a month will help this podcast to continue. Thank you, and God bless.